General, so it's not going to be very technology specific or any certain industry. It's design thinking, in my opinion, is something that can be used really widely in any industry. It can be used in your personal life to figure out stuff in your life if you want. So it's a very general presentation, but the things I want to talk about are very applicable to a wide range of things. So again, a little bit about me. I'm a PM at Pluralsight, and my manager asked me to say that we are hiring, so we are hiring for product managers, designers, data analysts, and some other stuff. So go to pluralsight.com/careers and check it out. I have some previous experience working in financial services, so I actually used to work right around the corner at John Hancock. I was a product manager. My last role there was a product manager in investments. So again, over there was building out products for portfolio managers. It's a little bit different than building for learners, but still the same. And I used to teach, I taught for 1 year in Miami. I taught 9th graders in reading comprehension. And then a couple fun facts about me. These are things that I could talk about for hours. Sports, education, hence the year of teaching, and Cheerios. If you know anything about me, I may have 5 boxes of Cheerios in my house. So what are we talking about today? Design thinking. What is it? What is it about? Who uses it? When do you use it? Why do you use it? Then we'll go through a quick case study in which I'll outline some of the points of design thinking, and then we'll get into research and why it's such a foundational piece of the design thinking process. So design thinking, what is it? Design thinking is a human-centered approach to solving complex problems, typically. And generally it's taught in a linear fashion, and that's how I'll go through it today. But it's very much a non-linear framework. It's a 5-step process, and it's really focusing on empathy to drive innovative solutions. So hopefully that's relatively readable, but this is these are the 5 steps of design thinking. And again, it can be done in really in any order, but for the purposes of this conversation and just teaching it, it's most logically understood in this order. So the first phase is empathize, and this is one thing that I'll get into in much more detail in the remainder of the presentation, but empathy is really understanding your user. Who are you solving for, and why are you solving for them? The next thing is, once you understand all the things that play, is define. And what you want to do here is really dig into and craft the problem. Like, how do I unpack all the things that I learned and then deliver the actual problem that I'm solving for? From there, you want to think through, okay, now that I know the problem and I know who I'm solving for, how do I come up with creative solutions for this person and their problem? And the ideation phase, there's a saying that goes, go wide, then decide. And this is the phase in which you want to think of all the possible solutions. However realistic, maybe they're not super realistic, but get your mind thinking all the possible ways in which you could solve this problem. And as you go through, then you start to narrow it down, because you don't want to get too narrow in your thinking and just get into a silo, and then you didn't look or consider any other options. So again, there's a saying called go wide then decide, and that's really the ideation phase. Once you've come up with some semblance of a potential solution, you want to prototype it. So how can I put together something scrappy that will get my point across, that can either confirm or invalidate my idea? So whether that's a physical prototype, it could be something that you drew on a piece of paper just to convey your idea. How can I put something together to test with someone? And then again, your last step is to then test it. So go out into the world, whoever your users are, and present your prototype and get feedback. And one thing that I like to point out in the testing phase is that if your user doesn't understand what you presented to them, this is not the time for you to defend what you put together. If they don't understand it, it wasn't the right solution. So again, you're going out. The testing phase is really a lot about understanding how this is received. Is it solving their problem? If it's not, where did I go wrong? Did I totally missed the boat and I don't even understand who I'm solving for. Or maybe during the ideation phase, I got rid of an idea that I should have considered. So again, we can go, it's a very cyclical pattern here, and I can go back from my testing phase. Maybe I didn't really define the problem very well, so I can go back there. Maybe it's just that my prototype wasn't exactly what it should have been, but I got everything else right. So wherever you need to go back, feel free to go back. And I'm gonna go back. Yeah, so again, 5 phases to design thinking. Design thinking is used by a lot of companies, for example, Apple. The reason Apple can put together products that are relatively addictive for some people is because they use this practice. They take a lot of time to understand who they are solving for and what those needs are, so that when they start delivering solutions, they're solutions that people actually want. And sometimes it's not things that I went to Apple and said, like, you know, I really need my phone to open when I look at it, but they delivered a solution and people really love that. So that's through understanding how people work. What are they trying to do? When they're on their phone, what are they doing? They want to do things faster. And all of that is because they put their customer first, and they really truly understand who they're solving for before they try and go out and create a solution. So let's get into the case study. And what you'll see here, hopefully, is a picture. This is me over here. And this is a whiteboard and it says thermometer. So again, I want to go through something that's not super tech heavy so that generally everyone can kind of understand the concepts here, but I do want to take you through how design thinking can be used in practice. So the story behind this. Again, I was a teacher in a 9th grade classroom in Miami-Dade County. The school that I was working in was a very underserved school. So the students were struggling, they didn't have a lot of resources, and just generally the school needed a lot of help. So I worked with an organization called City Year. If any of you have been through Boston, their headquarters is right around the corner. You see people in red jackets and Timberlands, those are the City Year people. Good people working in schools to help our students. So maybe about March of the school year, I had a student come to our after-school program, and my colleague said, hey, you know, can you help this student who's struggling in reading? And as a reading teacher, I'm like, yeah, sure, I got this. Like, I don't really know what that means, but I'll go for it. So I came in and I sat with a student who had a bunch of flashcards. And the flashcards, I just quickly looked through them, and it was like rug, apartment, toilet, like household items. So I'm like, okay. So I just held up one in front of him just to understand, like, what does he know? And it was like apartment. Looked at it, this, I don't know. So it's okay, fine. Let's go to the next one. Maybe it's like cable. Still has no idea. So I'm like, okay. So I flip through quickly and I get to one that's like pretty easy. I'm like, rug. Okay, let's like, this is a good one. And he looks at me and he's like, I have no idea what that says. And so at that point I understand, I'm like, okay, there's a problem here. What the problem is, like, clearly can't read, but I don't really understand how deep this problem goes. What I do know is that if you're in a room, probably about this size, with 30 other kids trying to read, and you obviously you can't, 1, it's intimidating, and 2, it's very hard to focus. So from there, we left the classroom, and we went into a smaller room where it was just the 2 of us, where we could work through something. So I said, okay, if you can't read these words, does he know the alphabet? So we went through, and he did know the alphabet, but he didn't know all the sounds all the letters made. So C and K can sometimes make the same sound. C and S can also sometimes make the same sound. But those things weren't there. So it took a while to get to the root of the problem and say, okay, you can't read, I can see that, but how deep does this go? So from there, I said, all right, like, let's start working through these. Let's just practice our letters for a little bit and practice the sounds they make. And it was clear at that point, like, there was a lot of foundational knowledge that was missing. So now I understand, he knows the alphabet, he doesn't know all the sounds the letters make, therefore we can't put together words so that we can read. So from there I said, all right, I got it, good grasp of what the problem is, how do we solve this? He's 18 years old in the 10th grade and cannot read. So that's a problem. But as a reading comprehension teacher, all my students, I was trained to teach them if they don't understand what they're reading. I was not taught in how to teach someone how to read. And then as I'm there thinking, I'm like, all right, like when I was growing up, like, how did I learn how to read? I'm like, does anyone here remember how to read? I don't really remember. Like, it just kind of happened along the way. So we had some a group of senior colleagues working in an elementary school, so I said, they must know. So I went to them, and I said, hey, like, help me understand how you teach your third graders how to read. And they're like, honestly, in the third grade, like, you should know how to read. So we also don't teach them. But for students who are struggling, we start to use picture associations for words. So I'm like, okay. So I kind of go through a couple different areas. Like, I could put a book in front of him, like, you know, the basic, like watch, skip, jump, whatever the book is called. The little small ones that you learn as a kid. But, like, obviously that wasn't going to work. I could sit there and like try and work through the flashcards, but that also wasn't going to work. So I'm like, you know what, let me try this like picture association thing. So I decided to take that and bring it back. So we used this whiteboard, and what I did was start to draw pictures as they associated with sounds. Because when the English language is it's terrible, it's really terrible and doesn't make any sense at all. So PH does not say puh-puh. Like, there are certain sounds that together they don't really make sense. But if you use a picture and associate that with a letter blend, soon you'll start remembering what that means. So we started using pictures, so for example, and things that he would relate to. So we used the Nike swoosh for the double O sound. Or we used a palm tree, we were in Miami, so we used a palm tree for the EE sound. So going through some of those things, and we started putting letters together to make words. So we learned letter blends, and we learned the TR sound, and if we put the EE together, now we can spell tree. Now we can recognize that it says tree because we know the EE is there and we know the TR is there. So we went through all of that. So the picture thing, I'm like, okay, like, that's cool. Is he actually learning now? And as you can see, we got some words out of it. So we had done at that point TH, which also is a very hard one because think and the are not the same sound. So learning through some of those things, you really just have to know. But we had gone through TH and we had gone through ER. At that point, at the end of every session, we would spell out a few words that use the letter blends that we had learned that day. And so I think it was maybe there. I'm like, hey, how about we spell there? And he's like, that's too easy. The person who couldn't read it like a couple months ago telling me it's too easy. I'm like, all right, fine. So my coworker comes in and I'm like, hey, Santana, give me a word for TH and ER. And she's like, how about thermometer? I was like, that's the bottom of this word. And so he's like, yeah, miss, I'm going to do that. So we get, you know, TH and ER. We got to thermomet, like basically there, and he just couldn't get the last two letters. It's like steam, like thermometer, like it just wasn't clicking. He's getting very, very frustrated, so then we just start putting those pictures back on the board. Does this work? And like that, the last ER came to him. So this is what that picture is of. And as you can see, like as we were going through that, so like congrats to him for being able to finally spell a word. This picture is actually, fun fact, is posted in my house because that was a great moment for me in being able to teach someone how to read. The best thing though was that the last week he is learning. And it's through that iterative process of trying different things to get to that solution. Like every picture that I drew did not necessarily correlate. Like I'm not an artist, so like my pictures aren't very good to begin with. So some things just didn't work, and we had to try a different picture because it just wasn't clicking. Like maybe we had to try, I don't know, like a cat with bigger ears or smaller ears or something. Like how do we get through that so that we can ensure that he is learning? So again, everything I tried didn't necessarily work, but ultimately we got to thermometer, so that's really what matters. So again, this is an example of how you can use design thinking. This has nothing to do with technology. It has nothing to do with whatever, like new software. This is a real world application of how you can solve a complex problem. How do you teach an 18-year-old whose native language is English, who missed all the fundamentals, how to read? And this again is a case where using design thinking. First, you have to understand how did he get here? What is his issue? What is the root of this issue? thinks that he can't read because he doesn't really understand how all the letters work together. Okay, once we understand that, and now we've defined what the problem is, how can I enable him to learn? And being able to determine what that problem statement is very, very important. If you don't do the right research in understanding what the user is going through, being able to come up with that problem is going to be very difficult, and if you can't do it, you're going to get it wrong. The next thing is ideation. So whether that's trying flashcards or trying a book or trying pictures, what are all the different ways that we can think of to solve this problem? And from there, you'll see here, my prototype was pictures worth 1,000 words. And literally in this case, the picture was worth 8,000 words. Because all the words that we were able to put together, because we were able to use that picture association, confirmed that this was a good way to move forward. Maybe it's not the standard way that they teach students how to read, but it's also not standard to have an 18-year-old in the 10th grade who can't read. So sometimes you have to get real creative with your solutions. And then the last thing is testing it. Is he learning? Can he spell a word? Like, we could have done letter associations all day or picture associations all day. If he wasn't able to put anything together at the end of it, then it wasn't a successful prototype. In this case, again, like solving complex problems, like this is, I wouldn't say it's a life and death problem, but like this will severely impact his life later on if he can't get this right. So again, this is an example of how you can solve a problem, whatever the problem is, generally more complex problems that don't have a clear path to the solution, using design thinking. So I say all that, say what? Like, so that was a great story, like, so what, who cares? Two things that are really important. If you don't do the right research, you're going to solve the wrong problem. If I just said, like, oh, he can't read, and just started throwing books in front of him, like, that's not really solving the problem. Like, if you can't put your finger on what the actual problem is, you're going to get whatever your solution you put together is going to be wrong. The second thing is, if you don't know your customer, whatever experience you craft for them is going to be also wrong. So again, like, I need to understand this is a student who was sitting in a room with 30 other students. Like, that's not going to work for us. We need to change our location in order to make this work. Now I need to understand what does he like? Does he like sports? Okay, the Nike swoosh, that's something that he's going to be able to relate to. And now I can use that to craft the correct experience. We started using a whiteboard rather than writing on paper because, like, for whatever reason, whiteboards are more exciting than writing on paper, and you can erase it and use different colors and whatever. So small things, but again, like making sure that you're always crafting the right experience for whoever your customer is. So the thing that I really want to harp on tonight is empathy. And a lot of times when you hear the word empathy, people think about feelings. Like, oh, I can empathize with that person because of X situation. I can feel what they feel. But in this sense, for me, empathy is about understanding and not just about like feelings. And really, what you want to do in the very first step of any situation that you're trying to solve for is really get smart on what the problem is. So whatever research it is that you feel like you have to do, make sure you do that and do it very, very thoroughly. Your users, again, like you can always do primary research and go to your user and say like, hey, like, what's your experience and how are you doing stuff, and tell me about your day. And that's great because that first-hand experience is going to help you understand what they know, but what your user tells you might not be actually what they really need. So being able to differentiate between, I'm telling you this is what I want, but I'm telling you through my research, this is what you actually need. So again, like companies like Apple, like I can go tell them like, I want my phone to teleport me somewhere, like, but that might not actually be what I need. Maybe I just need an app on my phone that expedites my process through the airport. That's not what I told them that I needed, but I did tell them that I want to get somewhere faster, and using that, they can craft a better experience. Not that they're making apps, but whatever. So empathy here, again, includes both primary and secondary research. And in your primary research, what you're really looking for is like the background. Like, help me understand like where we're coming from here. So in this case where I have a student, help me understand like how did you get here? Like what was going on? He told me, he was like, miss, I missed a lot of school growing up. I was into drugs and alcohol, I ended up going to jail, and I just missed school. I'm like, okay, like that helps me understand where you're coming from. That doesn't tell me how to teach you what you need to know, right? So who am I solving for? In this case, it was very obvious who I was solving for. Sometimes it's not as obvious. What are their needs and their goals and their desires? So I can have them articulate that to me, what they think they need. It may or may not be what they actually need, but it's good to hear from the user's perspective what they feel like they need. What are their goals and desired outcomes? Like, where are they trying to get to? Because again, they might not be able to tell you what they need, but they can tell you where they're trying to go, and you have to craft that experience between where they are right now and what they're trying to do. What makes them tick? So again, like, what are their drivers? What is motivating them to do or not do what they want to do? And what is their current experience like? So in this case, like, it wasn't a great experience. If you have to sit in class with however many other kids and everyone else is reading and the teacher's giving you assignments and you're just sitting there, that's not a good experience. So how do we change that? So these are some of the questions that you would ask your user or try and get your user to tell you. You might not ask them like what makes you tick, but you could say like, hey, you know, like, what is causing you to want to do this, or why do you want to do this thing? In your secondary research is what's going to tell you things that your user can't. So in my situation, my student can tell me like, I don't know that C and K make the same sound, because he didn't know that, he didn't know that. So there's certain things that you're not going to be able to get out of your user, but you still need to know. So how do you get that type of information? What are the data points that you need to capture in order to fill in those gaps that your user can't fill in for you? The secondary research, again, like, that can be going out. In my current role, I deal a lot with skill assessments. How do people learn? And that's a very applicable in this situation again. Like, I need to understand fundamentally how a person learns in order to deliver the solution. And again, that is nothing that I'm going to get out of primary research. I can empathize and feel like all I want, but understanding fundamentally like how the human brain works is not something that my user can tell me. So that's why it's very, very important to make sure you've covered both your primary and secondary research and not just say like, I'm going to do 67 user interviews today and gather all my data and then go run and be free. Like, that doesn't work. And again, like, where are the gaps in my own understanding? Maybe that the user like doesn't feel like, and maybe it's not a gap in their understanding. Maybe they don't need to know. Like, he doesn't need to know fundamentally how someone learns. He just is trying to learn. But I need to know fundamentally how someone learns in order to deliver a solution for him. And again, this process, your research process, can go on as long as it takes for you to be super crystal clear on what the problem is. If you are not able to say like very, very clearly, this is what the problem is and this is why it's happening, like, don't even bother trying to solve for it because you don't know what you're solving for. And again, like, the what and why, like, that's what you need to be crystal clear on. The how will come later. The how is like, okay, I'm going to ideate and then I'm going to prototype and I'm testing. Like, if you don't know what you're solving for, there's no point in putting together a prototype because you're probably not going to get it right. So that's the real piece here of like getting smart, really getting very clear and concrete on your solution. And again, like, practice makes perfect on this. We're kind of perfect on this. Like, nothing's ever going to be perfect about your process, but the more you do it, the more it becomes second nature. So again, I mentioned that design thinking is a framework. It's a decision-making framework at the end of the day. But really it needs to come second nature. Like, as a product manager, you need to like jump into that empathy phase and understand what the problem is. Like, that is your job. Like, not like it's your job, it is your job. Jump into it, and it's not a matter of like, okay, like, I have a problem. Okay, first I have to empathize with this person. Okay, now I've empathized, let me define. Like, it needs to be something that comes so second nature, you don't even think about it. Like, a problem comes up and you're like, explain that to me a little bit more. Help me understand, like, unpack that a little bit for me. Why is this happening? Who is it happening to? What are they trying to do? Like, just start just banging out questions. And once you feel like you have a good amount of data to use, then you jump into your synthesis. And there are hundreds, probably, of different kinds of decision-making frameworks that you can use in that defined state phase, whether it's like information clustering or like synthesizing, whatever, like however you want to do it. Like there's a bajillion ways that you can do it, and that's like a completely different presentation that I won't get into today. But if you don't have the research to synthesize, like there's nothing to do. So making sure that it's a muscle that you're like exercising all the time to the point where it's just like second nature, and you're presented with a new problem. Like I do this in my personal life. Like somebody's like, oh, like, you know, I'm having trouble with blah blah, and I'm like, okay, well tell me more. Like help me understand that. Okay, well what's this? What's causing that? Like, well, what are you doing about this? And it becomes second nature to the point where I'm like, I shouldn't be using them as like a test subject. Like your job at home, at work. But again, like it's something that becomes so second nature that it's a state of mind, not just a framework that you use. And again, like every time you do this, you'll come up with something different. Not every framework is right for every situation. Sometimes your research base is pretty simple because the problem isn't too complicated, and maybe you can get all your research from primary research. But I want you to make sure that you're always thinking about, like, are there gaps in my understanding? Are there gaps in what my user told me? Is there some discrepancy in what multiple users told me? Like, this doesn't really seem to be adding up. Why? Those are the types of things that you need to figure out before you start crafting a solution. Yeah, that's kind of the gist on that. So some key takeaways from like this whole thing. Again, design thinking. It is a very human-centered approach to problem solving. Again, putting the user at the forefront of what you're doing, not whatever technology stack you have to use or like your budget or whatever other external factors are in play. Making sure that your user is always first and you're understanding what they need before you jump into like, okay, well this is what I'm going to do for a solution, or maybe I'll give them this. If you don't understand what they need and why they need it, then the rest is kind of a waste of time. Again, proper research will make or break your outcomes. So again, if I had just said like, oh, he can't read, like let's just practice reading some more, like he would have never gotten there or wouldn't have gotten there in the 2 months time that it took for us to get to that word. And again, like there's a lot of work that went into it, and there was a lot of iterative, like this is not working, this is not working. I didn't get into all of those, I just made it sound like I got it right the first time, but I didn't. There's a lot of going back through the process and figuring out where did I go wrong? Is there anything that I'm not understanding? Like, okay, he doesn't understand this, but what about this? And then there were some points in time where I was making assumptions that weren't correct. So being able to go back and validate your assumptions or invalidate your assumptions and your understanding of the problem. Again, like the English language is very difficult. Like English is my first language, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Think and the both start with TH. They do not make, it's not like think and it just, that's not how it is. So correcting your own understandings of what things are before you present them to your users is really important. And again, there's no like one cookie cutter way to solve this. Like maybe sometimes your define phase is going to be really, really long, and your ideation phase is really short, or you skip a step, which might be kind of weird. You probably shouldn't do that. Don't do that. I take it back. Don't do that. Go through all 5 steps. You don't have to go through them in order. Maybe you're just like, you know what? I'm going to throw a prototype in front of this person and see what happens. And that you can use that as your understanding phase. Like, did this work? No. Why? Where are the pieces where this didn't work? Sometimes that's not always the best. Sometimes if you want just like a quick hit, like, let me see if this thing works. Like I have an idea, I just want to quickly test it. Sometimes that works, and that's fine. Like you didn't start with the empathy phase, it's totally fine. If you think you have a good enough idea, just throw something in front of them. If it's a low risk situation and whatever, you drew it on a piece of paper with a Sharpie, like, great, fine. Did it work? No. Why? So again, don't necessarily have to go in order. It's just taught in that way because it's more logical in that order. But you can start really wherever you want to start. So that's really all I had for you guys today. Again, this is something that I use a lot. I didn't necessarily talk about like my job specifically because I wanted to make it so that generally everyone could understand. But I'm happy to talk about maybe how I use it. But again, this is something that I use and swear by. Again, like the results are pretty clear, like it works.
several companies use it, and there's various forms of it, but really the meat of it is putting your user first and making sure that you're doing the research before you do anything else is really what's going to help you drive through this process. So that's all I had for you guys.